A bird in the wind told me you guys were looking for the best weapons for Kazuha. Don't worry, we have all the math and the spreadsheets and the data for you guys in this video. The best weapons for both sub DPS, main DPS, side DPS, EM mastery support, and everything you need to know about this character is going to be featured in this video. If you guys want to know more stuff about Kazuha, you need a whole guide that'll be out tomorrow. If you guys want to know more about the Swirl reaction, then go right on ahead and check out the video I put up just the other day on that. Now, getting into this video here, the best weapons. So as you get into the weapons, what are you running alongside the weapons? What's going on here with the substats? The substats in these mathematical equations are highly rolled pieces of 5-star artifacts, of course. Now we're focusing on crit chance and crit damage in the substats with a tiny little sprinkle of attack percent here or there for the sub DPS, main DPS builds. On top of that, here we are using a Viridescent Venerer set because Kazuha here is a fantastic AoE character, and a lot of people really underrate just how strong the 4-piece set is at boosting his own damage. Because yes, even if you're building him for damage with crit chance and crit damage and attack percent, he is still going to be swirling a lot, and that 60% swirl is going to help boost his damage all that additional. And then on top of that, it also has the resist element down, which doesn't work for Animo, but some of his attacks do have that elemental infusion, and it will apply for that part of his kit as well. That's going to outweigh like the 18% attack that you're doing with your gladiator set in AoE circumstances, but more on swirl and that later. And of course, obviously you're wearing an Animo goblet. We're focusing on crit chance. We have a crit chance circlet and an attack percent sands for these DPS builds. There are going to be some EM builds in here as well. When we get over those are all EM based main stat artifacts with focusing on crit chance, crit damage, a little bit of energy recharge, and then of course obviously the tiny bit of EM you can get on your flower and your feather as well for the EM builds. So the first weapon we're gonna be tackling here is gonna be that black sword. R1, R5, it does not matter here because we're doing hold elemental skill, plunge absorb, elemental burst, and then the 5 following damage over time effects from that elemental burst. Now remember, the ones that are absorbed, those are affected by your swirl in your 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set associated with swirl. So they're going to get that extra resist down, right? Because you're doing cryo or pyro additional damage. Well, you're also reducing cryo or pyro, whatever element that you swirl with that 4-piece. So that's going to help that out a lot there. Now, as you can see here, we're doing a paltry 123,000 total damage here. This isn't factoring in defense, but it is factoring in enemy resistances because Kazuha is Animo. Unless you have, a Venti with multiple constellations or a multiple constellation gene in your team, you are going to suffer that 10% Animo resistance down unless you have also Zhongli. And you are going to be affected by that unless you have certain external forces like we just mentioned there. So you can see the whole thing here, the 1-2-3 wombo combo with the little bit of ticks there, 123,000 damage. Now the Lion Roar also is a very decent weapon. This is with no proc, with the proc at R1 and with the proc at R5. Remember, the enemy has to be affected by certain different elements. So if you have like an electro charge team with your Kazuha in here, that's gonna be a very fantastic weapon for you because you can go all the way up to 150k damage with that one combo by the time the final one has ticked there. And that's just from your raw damage. We're tackling swirl a little bit later when we get into more EM stuff. And the swirl stuff does actually kind of matter for these non-EM focused builds because remember, you get 115 EM from a level 90 Kazuha, and then on top of that you get that extra swirl damage bonus for that 4-piece VV set. The other weapon that we're looking at here is going to be Black Cliff. No stacks here, or all the stacks. So we have Black Cliff with no stacks. Remember, if you can't defeat an enemy, you don't get the attack percent from the Black Cliff. So it is pretty bad if you don't have additional stacks. But if you are at R1 or R5 with 3 stacks up, it becomes a very sufficient weapon, all the way up to 167,000 damage with just that one combo there. Now the Sacrificial Sword is a weapon that does do a fair amount of damage here, but this is with the reset. You would do 101,000 damage there, but you would also factor in the initial combo again, so add another 34,993, and you'd just be at 135,000 damage. Now the reason why this is so low, lower base attack than all the other weapons, which is 454, you have energy recharge instead of some sort of offensive stat, so it's going to drop that down. However, it is going to help you build additional particles, get additional swirls in there on top of that, and so it is a pretty powerful weapon, although it's not going to be nearly the best, although you can use it in these circumstances with Kazuha here, and you can kind of use it possibly in an AoE circumstance, you get extra swirls. You get 2 extra swirls, one from your hold E, one from your plunge, because you get to reset it and do it again. So you get the extra raw damage and the swirl damage against multiple enemies, and that's going to be a fun thing for you there. But for raw damage, not very good. Now let's move into some of the 5-star weapons here. We have the Primordial Jade Cutter at R1 and R5. So this is a fantastic weapon for Kazuha here. You're gonna have a very high crit rate, 80%, and then you just focus in substat crit damage everywhere, and you're gonna be doing a large amount of damage here, up to 168,000 damage with just that little bit of a wombo combo. The R5 version, 189,000 damage with that same combo. The Summit Shaper is right on top of the Jade Cutter with very similar Big Daddy builds, so to say here. So we are focusing on, once again, crit chance, crit damage in the substats, attack percent, wherever you can get it. And you're just going to be able to get some nice numbers. They're right on top of each other, as you can see there. And then the R5 in this circumstance, it does outdo the Jade Cutter a tiny amount there. And this is because between the two R5 weapons, the amount of additional attack you get in a Summit Shaper build, as long as you have a shield on, is going to be larger. You get an extra 40% attack, whereas the Jade Cutter, it's based off your HP. You're not really building HP on Kazuha here, and so since that refinement rank on the Jade Cutter is just giving you a little bit of extra attack, we're talking like 200 extra attack, 250 extra attack, whereas the Summit Shaper is giving you 40% extra attack, which is a large amount. We're talking like 400 attack. It slowly outpaces it there, but if you have some external force like Bennett in your team to give you attack, then the crit chance and crit damage from the Primordial Jade Cutter R5 will then outsurpass the Summit Shaper as well. Now let's get into some of the EM builds here, and as we talk about these, we're going to be talking about a little bit of a unique mechanic called Swirl in Genshin Impact, and this is where these weapons, even though they do terrible damage and raw damage in comparison to the other builds, they're just wildly bad in raw damage compared to the ones we just went over. But don't worry, Swirl's gonna come back and save them. Let me explain. Now these EM builds here, you can see, do terrible damage: 60k, 67k, 69k, 80k, 98k with an R5 Freedom Sword with the proc on. Why would you ever want to use these weapons? Well, this is because Swirl has some very fantastic and unique mechanics when it comes to AoE in Genshin Impact. Swirl is an amazing asset in AoE teams in Genshin because Swirl, even though it can only proc 2 AoE damage effects, you can hit multiple people with those effects. So say, for instance, you have the Iron Sting, which does 6,325 raw swirl damage in this build. It has 841 elemental mastery. You have 533% damage increase to your swirl, 6,325. That sounds absolutely terrible, right? Well, no, you're not right. You're very wrong, actually, because here is what happens. Your hold E, proc swirl, your plunge, proc swirl, activating your elemental burst, proc swirl, and then the 5 dot attacks from your elemental burst, proc swirl. So you're gonna get 8 swirls while that happens. Okay, 8 times 6,300 seems pretty good. Still not really tickling my fancy. It's like 48k damage. Who cares? But here's what happens when you do Swirl the right way. Now, the thing about Swirl is each time you swirl, there's a 0.5 second cooldown between how many times you can do damage with said swirl. But even though you can only proc 2 swirls per 0.5 seconds, those 2 swirls can hit multiple enemies. So take a look at this right here. Now in this screenshot, you can see there's 4 enemies. They're about to get swirled on, right? There's a bunch of fun guys hanging out, having fun, right? One of them has cryo on, cryo. We're just doing raw swirl. So they're all right there. They're all standing right there. I go to swirl with Kazuha, and now you can see this. And this is where a lot of people get confused. They see the green swirl, right, in letters, and they think the green is the swirl damage. No, the green is actually the damage from the elemental burst here as it's procced. As you can see, there is an AoE field here of hydro, right? There's an AoE hydro field. So that green damage is actually the raw damage from the elemental burst. A big blue number, the deep blue number, is from the additional effect, right, from his elemental burst at 541. And then the swirl is actually all of the light blue numbers. So what happened here is those enemies, 4 of them were close to another, and I procced swirl 2 times, right? And it hit 8 times. Why? Well, because there's 4 guys. I get 2 AoEs. Well, one AoE hits 4 persons. The other AoE also hits 4 people. So you see 4,418, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and then 3,458 you see that 2 times. That's because that's the initial swirl as they go off in conjunction with each other, and then it's proccing the Viridescent Venerer 4-piece set and lowering everyone's resistances. So that 6,300 damage swirl that you can see from the Elemental Mastery build for the big old Iron Stinger out here actually is going to be hitting 8 times if you have 4 enemies around, which is a huge deal when talking about these EM builds. Other reactions that you can do with Swirl, we're going to keep it simple here in this video. We're going to be talking about Swirl with like maybe 1 reaction that hits like 4 people. But you can do way beyond that. As you can see in this photo here, we have 2 swirls that proc hit everybody. We overload hit everybody. Then we vaporize our swirl and it's hitting for a ton of damage. The overload's doing 10k. The swirls are hitting 2 people for 3.4k each. And we're doing a bunch of stuff there. You can also do stuff like this with Swirl, where you double melt each person there. The slime would take way less damage from our swirl, but the swirl procs melt and then gets buffed up by your own elemental mastery. You can see that slime took double 17,000 damage. They all do terrible raw damage. So the swirl here for these different builds, very strong. You have the Iron Sting, the Agly Flash, the Freedom Sword with the proc, and the Freedom Sword at R5 with the proc. All of these different weapons are around 6,000 and some change, 5.6k for the Agly Flash there with swirl damage. So with all that taken into account, remember, you get 8 of these swirls, and each of these weapons are doing like 6,000, a little bit over that per damage per swirl for these different elemental mastery builds. But what we just talked about is we get 8 swirls from our whole combo. If you're in an AoE situation, this is where these are going to shine. Now, if there's just 2 enemies standing next to each other, you're gonna get a lot of damage here. Those 8 swirls against 1 person will do 50k. But if there's 2 people standing right next to each other, well, you get 8 swirls on one guy, 8 swirls on the other guy, and they cross over, you actually end up getting a lot more extra hits, because that 8 swirls is actually 16 instances of damage, and the 8 swirls on the other guy is another 16 instances of damage. So you end up getting a very, very high 32 hits of swirl, which takes us all the way up to 2,000 into swirl damage on the Iron Sting, which is actually quite a lot. The Alley Flash a little bit lower, Freedom Sword a little bit higher, but right around 200,000 swirl damage right away from 2 enemies. If you were to do an overloaded with this, the raw overload would be 18k. If it hits 5 guys, we'll times that by 5, and then it gets even crazier. So say we had, like we saw, 4 enemies. Well, if we have 4 enemies, it's going to do a ton of damage, because each swirl is going to hit 4 people, which is a lot, but we get 2 swirls. So 1 swirl hits 4 people, the other swirl hits 4 people. That's a ton of damage, because that's then 8 instances with 1 swirl, which is very, 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 very large. And then remember, we're doing 8 swirls with a combo. That's 64 instances of swirl damage, which takes us all the way up to 363,000 points of damage with these 8 different swirls, which is a ton of damage. But swirl is also still very good for the raw DPS builds. That's why you're still using the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set. So look at something like the Primordial Jade Cutter or the Summit Shaper or whatever it is here. The swirls, they're still doing good damage, 2,467 damage here on the Primordial Jade Cutter or any of these other builds that aren't focused on elemental mastery. You don't have to focus on it for it to still be worth your while to know how it works here. If you're swirling 4 enemies with the Jade Cutter straight up damage build, 157,000 damage. Is it 400k? No, but it's still almost half as much damage as the other weapons. So very, very, very relevant and prevalent part of Kazuha's Get is still swirl, no matter how you're building him, unless you're doing single target damage. If you're doing single target damage, swirl's just not that good. Kazuha, you're just doing most of your damage from just your plunge combo. So you're looking at like 67k. The raw damage thing is really all you're kind of looking at there. With a single target effect on Kazuha, he really shines in AoE, and this is what these builds and these weapons are really going to allow you to do. Now, I always look at the damage sheet here. All in all, which one's the best? Now, this one is just the full combo and the 8 swirls. And before you ask, yes, this is a lot of damage here. Why is it so much damage? It's against AoE targets. So yes, on top of that, right, the full combo for the DPS builds. I'm not trying to favor the EM builds here by being, oh, swirl's good in AoE. I'll just count the swirls AoE, not the main attacks. No. These attacks are also hitting multiple targets. So the E is hitting 4 people, the plunge is hitting 4 people, the elemental burst is hitting 4 people, all of the dots are hitting 4 people. Everything's been calculated calculated the same way for you guys. If you guys want to see those calculations, I'll have this spreadsheet probably like in my Discord. I'll have a link to it in there so you guys can get access to it. If you want to go ahead and do that, I'll have the link to the Discord as always in every video down below. So now you see stuff like this. Atlee Flash doing pretty well. Black Sword near the bottom, but not as bad as the Sacrificial Sword. Right dead set in the middle, 629,000 damage. Very bad. That is with the reset. He's not having a good fun day out there at all. Now the EM builds are at the bottom of this list here. You can see the Iron Sting, 820,000 damage. It's 70,000 damage less than the Summit Shaper, which is a high DPS 5-star weapon build with insanely well rolled substats on artifacts. Now this is for, like we said, AoE damage here, and you can see the Freedom Sword with the proc, and the R5 with the proc. Very high damage, 980,000 damage from their Freedom Sword. EM build in AoE situations, 991,000 with the Summit Shaper R5. Very close to this, 980,000 from the Jade Cutter R5, the R1 weapons of the Summit Shaper and the Jade Cutter, literally 897,000 damage there. Now check out some of these 4-star weapons. There's 2 super notable ones at R5 here. Now you have the Lion's Roar. If you're using the Lion's Roar, you can maintain that debuff on the enemy, so you get that extra damage bonus. It's a very strong weapon, 843,000 damage. Remember, the 2 5-star weapons, the 2 best 5-star weapons at R1 were 896,000 damage in this period. Blackcliff R5, if you can maintain the stacks, which Kazuha is good at doing AoE damage, and the Blackcliff wants you to be in an AoE fight, it would be a fantastic weapon for him. It is right on the heels of the R1 5-star weapons, 892,000 damage there for you. It's an insane amount of damage. Now, do the EM builds beat out in AoE situations all of these straight up DPS builds? No, they don't, but they're exceptionally close. And remember, this isn't accounting for your ability to do crazy things like proc melt on everyone, vaporize on everyone, overload on 2 dudes, blowing up to the moon. If you account for that, then the EM builds in these situations will blow out these straight up DPS builds 100%. But it's so hard to factor in if you guys are going to play that way, if you guys have the teams for that, if you guys have the knowledge for that, to really tell you whether or not, oh yeah, the EM weapons here, blow them right through the moon. Now, if you are, and you're still here at the end of the video, still here, and you know what I'm talking about, you've seen the screenshots, you've seen some of the gameplay, you know how you can go ahead and melt and proc vaporize on multiple things like showed off in the screenshots, then yes, this is just raw damage with Swirl in AoE situations. Well, if you add other reactions to that, then it's going to be really insane, and yes, they will outpace the straight up damage weapon. And with that in mind, remember, on top of that, these EM builds are also giving you, because they have 860, 890 different points of elemental mastery, they're giving you like a 30 to 33, 34% damage buff from his second ascension as well, which the other ones, they're only giving you like a 3% damage buff to your main support, main DPS, other characters, whatever it is that you're using in your party. So the EM builds are doing comparable damage and still giving a very sizable chunk of element damage bonus to the rest of your party. As always, behind the scenes work is a ton. We've been working on this for a while, okay? So if you guys want to see more stuff like this, you guys want to come back to the channel, hang out, have fun, go into the Discord, check out the Twitch, subscribe to the YouTube. And if you are subscribed, make sure that you are actually subscribed. All right, make sure that bell is actually on, it's clicked and all that cool stuff, because there's been stuff going around on the tubes from what I heard. I don't know, but just double check it for yourself. If you guys want to see more stuff, you know where I'm at. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care, guys.